Millionaire is shocked to see 4 children identical to him on the street and is surprised. The auditorium of St. Mary's Elementary School buzzed with excitement as parents filled the seats, cameras ready to capture their children's Christmas performance. In the front row, Sarah Matthews sat alone, her face pale but wearing a brave smile. Her 4 identical 5-year-old boys were about to perform, and nothing would make her miss this moment, not even the crushing pain in her chest that had been growing worse over the past weeks. On stage, Lucas, the most outgoing of her quadruplets, stepped forward for his solo. His clear voice rang out across the auditorium, singing Silent Night, while his brothers Noah, Liam, and Oliver swayed gently in their angel costumes behind him. Sarah's vision blurred with tears of pride, but also from the increasing dizziness she'd been fighting all evening. "Mummy, look at me," Lucas called out between verses, breaking character in his excitement. The audience chuckled warmly and Sarah managed to wave back, ignoring the cold sweat breaking out across her forehead. She had to stay strong just a few more minutes. Her boys needed to have this perfect memory. But as Lucas reached the final verse, Sarah's world began to spin. The lights of the auditorium swirled into a kaleidoscope of colors, and the music became distant, as if underwater. She gripped the armrest, her knuckles white, desperately trying to stay conscious. "Sleep in heavenly peace," Lucas's voice faded as Sarah slumped forward in her seat. The last thing she heard was her sons' panicked cries of "Mummy" echoing through the auditorium, their small feet running down from the stage in their angel costumes. She wanted to tell them everything would be okay, but the darkness was already pulling her under. In the chaos that followed, 4 terrified little boys in angel wings clustered around their unconscious mother, while parents rushed to help and someone called 911. "Please wake up, Mummy Oliver, the youngest by 2 minutes," whispered through his tears. "You promised to watch the whole show." The Christmas performance that should have been a celebration of innocence and joy had become the moment when 4 little angels faced their greatest fear, losing the only parent they'd ever known, the mother who had sacrificed everything to give them a life filled with love. Despite being abandoned and alone, if this heart-wrenching opening scene touched your soul, there's so much more to come. Join our community of story lovers by subscribing now. Every subscription helps us share more powerful tales of love, sacrifice, and redemption that will move your heart. Before the heartbreak and struggles, Sarah Matthews was a rising star at Morrison Bennett, one of New York's most prestigious law firms. Her corner office on the 47th floor overlooked Central Park, a daily reminder of how far she'd come from her humble beginnings in a small Ohio town. At 32, she had already made junior partner, specializing in corporate law with a reputation for being both brilliant and compassionate, a rare combination in her cutthroat field. Sarah's colleagues often wondered how she maintained her humanity in an industry known for crushing souls. While others saw corporations as faceless entities, she saw the people behind them. She took pro bono cases for small business owners, spent weekends at legal clinics helping immigrants understand their rights, and mentored young female attorneys struggling to find their footing in the male-dominated legal world. Her personal style reflected this duality: sharp Armani suits paired with small, handmade earrings bought from street vendors she defended. Her long auburn hair was always perfectly styled, but she kept a photograph of her late parents' small-town diner on her desk, a reminder of where she came from and the values they had instilled in her. Sarah's rise hadn't come easily. She had worked her way through law school, waiting tables, just as she had helped her parents in their diner growing up. The death of her parents in a car accident during her second year of law school had nearly derailed her dreams, but she had channeled her grief into her studies, graduating summa cum laude from Columbia Law. Their life insurance policy had paid for her final year of school, their last gift to their only child. At the firm, she was known for her photographic memory and ability to find overlooked details in contracts that saved her clients millions. But it was her laugh, warm and genuine, that made her stand out in the cold marble hallways. Her assistant, Mary, often said that Sarah was the only partner who knew the names of every cleaning staff member and security guard in the building. Life seemed perfect on paper. The apartment on the Upper East Side, invitations to gallery openings and charity galas, and a growing reputation as one of the city's top young attorneys. Yet Sarah felt something was missing. She kept her parents' wedding rings on a chain around her neck, touching them when she needed strength or guidance. Despite her success, she longed for the kind of deep, lasting love they had shared in their small-town diner, serving coffee and pie to regulars who became family. She never expected that love would find her during a routine corporate merger, or that it would lead her down a path that would ultimately test every belief she held about justice, success, and the true meaning of family. But that's exactly what happened the day Michael Richardson walked into her office, setting in motion a chain of events that would transform her perfectly ordered life into something she never could have imagined, for better and for worse. Little did she know that all her legal training, all her carefully built success, and all her compassion would soon be tested in ways that no law school could have prepared her for. The woman who had never lost a case was about to face the greatest trial of her life, one where the stakes weren't measured in dollars and cents, but in heartbeats and tiny breaths, in midnight fevers and first steps. In a love so deep it would shake the foundations of everything she thought she knew about strength, justice, and forgiveness. Michael Richardson entered Sarah's life like a force of nature. As CEO of Richardson Global Enterprises, his presence commanded attention. Tall, impeccably dressed in bespoke suits, with steel blue eyes that seemed to see straight through the corporate facades he encountered daily. Their first meeting was meant to be a simple merger consultation, but it became the beginning of a whirlwind romance that would capture the imagination of New York's elite social circles. What struck Sarah first wasn't his wealth or his power, but his unexpected warmth. Despite running a billion-dollar empire, he carried a worn photograph of his late father's first hardware store in his wallet. During their initial meeting, he spent more time asking about protecting his employees' interests than discussing profit margins. When he smiled, really smiled, not the practiced expression he wore for board meetings, it transformed his entire face, making him look younger than his 38 years. Their love story began with late-night strategy sessions over takeout Chinese food in her office, him loosening his tie while she kicked off her heels, both of them poring over contracts but stealing glances when they thought the other wasn't looking. He brought her coffee exactly how she liked it, vanilla latte, extra hot, with a sprinkle of cinnamon. She noticed he always thanked the cleaning staff, just as she did. Their first real date was unplanned. A sudden summer thunderstorm trapped them in the office one evening. Instead of calling his driver, Michael suggested they wait it out. They ended up sitting on the floor of her office, sharing the emergency chocolate she kept in her desk drawer, trading stories about their childhoods. He spoke about losing his father young, about his mother's determination to maintain the family business, about the pressure of living up to a legacy. She told him about the diner, about her parents' love story, about the way they danced in the kitchen after closing time. The city's socialites whispered about them, the self-made lawyer and the billionaire CEO, but in private moments they were just Sarah and Michael, two people who understood the weight of responsibilities and dreams. He showed up at her pro bono clinics with coffee for everyone. She attended his board meetings and suggested employee benefit programs. They built something that seemed unbreakable. Michael proposed 6 months later on a regular Tuesday evening in her office. No grand gestures, no elaborate plans, just him kneeling beside her desk where their story began, holding her grandmother's restored ring that he'd tracked down through 3 states and 5 antique dealers. Because some traditions are worth preserving, he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. Their engagement made headlines in the society pages, but they planned a relatively intimate wedding. Michael's mother, Elizabeth Richardson, insisted on handling the arrangements, though Sarah noticed the older woman's tight smiles and subtle criticisms. Yet Michael assured her everything would be perfect, and she believed him. After all, their love had seemed powerful enough to overcome any obstacle. What Sarah didn't see were the late-night arguments between Michael and his mother, the whispered conversations with his new executive assistant Stella, the mounting pressure from the board about the company's image. She didn't notice how Stella always seemed to be there, offering support, planting seeds of doubt, playing on Michael's deepest insecurities about living up to his father's legacy. Their love story was perfect until it wasn't. Looking back, Sarah would wonder if she had been naive, if she had been so caught up in the fairy tale that she missed the warning signs. But then she would remember the genuine love in his eyes when he proposed, the way he knew exactly how to make her laugh, the plans they made for their future. And she would know that some part of it had been real, even if it ended in a way neither of them could have predicted. That was the cruel irony. Their story began with a merger, but it would end with a much more painful kind of acquisition, one that would leave Sarah alone but with an unexpected treasure she never could have imagined. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur of perfect moments. Sarah and Michael moved into a stunning brownstone on the Upper West Side, merging their lives with the same efficiency they brought to their business dealings. Every Sunday morning, they walked hand in hand through Central Park, stopping at their favorite coffee cart where Michael always overtipped the elderly vendor. Their home filled with photographs, Sarah in Michael's suit jacket at a company barbecue, Michael covered in flour after a disastrous attempt at baking her birthday cake, both of them surrounded by laughing children at the firm's annual Christmas party. Martha, the Richardson family's longtime housekeeper, became Sarah's unexpected ally. The older woman, who had known Michael since he was a boy, would visit with homemade cookies and stories about young Michael's adventures. He was always a kind child, Martha would say, her eyes twinkling, until his father died and his mother. Well, she would always trail off, leaving sentences unfinished, as if holding back secrets she wasn't ready to share. Their wedding plans reflected their shared values, elegant but not ostentatious. Sarah chose a simple ivory gown that made Michael's eyes well up during her final fitting. They planned to host the ceremony in the garden of Michael's family estate, followed by a reception that would donate its excess food to local shelters. Every detail seemed to reinforce that they were building something lasting, something real. But beneath this perfect surface, subtle cracks began to form. Elizabeth Richardson's criticisms of Sarah grew more frequent, though always couched in concern. "Darling, are you sure you want to continue working after the wedding? The Richardson wives have always focused on charity work." Or, "That law clinic work is admirable, dear, but it might send the wrong message to the board." Michael would defend Sarah, but his rebuttals grew weaker, more hesitant. Then there was Stella Evans, hired as Michael's executive assistant 6 months before the wedding. Tall, elegant, and impeccably efficient, she seemed to anticipate Michael's every need. Sarah noticed how Stella's hand would linger on Michael's arm when showing him documents, how she was always at the office late when Michael worked evenings. But Sarah trusted Michael completely, dismissing her concerns as pre-wedding jitters. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah overheard a conversation that should have warned her. She was dropping off some contract revisions at Michael's office late one evening when she heard his mother's voice, sharp and clear. "Think about your father's legacy, Michael." What would he say about this? Dilution of the Richardson name. There was a long pause before Michael replied, so quietly Sarah almost missed it. "I love her." Mother Elizabeth's response was, "Cold love isn't always enough, darling. Sometimes duty must come first." Sarah should have confronted them then, should have fought for her love. Instead, she convinced herself it was normal pre-wedding tension. She threw herself into final preparations, the seating arrangements, the flowers, the band selection. She wrote her vows with tears of joy in her eyes, imagining their future together. The morning of the wedding dawned, perfect, clear blue skies, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of roses from the garden. Sarah's best friend Emma helped her into her gown, arranged her veil, clasped her parents' wedding rings around her neck. The garden looked magical, White chairs lined up in neat rows, rose petals scattered along the aisle. Their closest friends and family filled the seats, along with New York's business elite. Sarah stood in the bridal suite, her heart full of love and hope, completely unaware that in less than an hour, her perfect world would shatter. She didn't know that while she was checking her reflection one last time, Michael was sitting in his car 3 blocks away, his mother's words echoing in his head, Stella's hand on his arm offering cold comfort. She couldn't have imagined that the happiest day of her life was about to become the beginning of a journey that would test her in ways she never thought possible and ultimately lead her to a different kind of love story, one more profound than anything she could have planned. The church bells chimed noon, but the groom's place at the altar remained empty. Sarah stood in the bridal suite, her hands trembling as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her ivory silk gown. The whispers from the gathered guests filtered through the heavy wooden doors, growing louder with each passing minute. Emma, her maid of honor, kept checking her phone, her forced smile becoming increasingly strained. "He's just stuck in traffic," Emma said for the 3rd time, but her voice wavered. Sarah touched the wedding rings around her neck, her parents' rings seeking comfort in their familiar weight. The antique clock on the wall ticked mercilessly, each second echoing like a drumbeat in the tense silence. Father James appeared at the door, his kind face etched with concern. "Sarah, my child," he began, but couldn't continue. He didn't need to. Sarah knew. The truth was written in the pity in his eyes, in the way Emma suddenly found the floor fascinating, in the hushed murmurs growing louder outside. Sarah moved to the window, her wedding dress rustling softly. From here she could see the arriving guests, could watch as they checked their phones and whispered behind raised hands. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until she knew for certain. The confirmation came in the form of a text message not from Michael but from his assistant Stella. "Mr. Richardson sends his regrets. The wedding will not proceed as planned, formal, cold, businesslike, as if cancelling a merger rather than destroying a life." The room spun and Sarah gripped the windowsill for support. Through the gathering storm in her mind, she heard Emma cursing, heard Father James offering prayers and platitudes. But all she could focus on was a black town car parked across the street, and the figures she could see inside, Michael and Stella, watching. Without a word, Sarah gathered her skirts and ran. Past Emma's reaching hands, past Father James's startled expression, down the aisle she was supposed to walk as a bride. The guests' expressions ranged from shock to pity to morbid fascination as she fled past them, her veil streaming behind her like a surrender flag. She burst through the church doors into the bright summer sunlight, gasping for air that suddenly seemed too thin. The town car was still there. As she watched, it pulled away from the curb, carrying away the man she'd thought would be her husband, leaving her stranded in a white dress that now felt like a costume in a cruel play. The first wave of nausea hit her then, sudden and violent. She barely made it to a nearby planter before retching, her body rejecting more than just the breakfast Emma had insisted she eat. When she straightened, she saw her reflection in a store window, mascara streaked, lipstick smeared, veil askew. A ruined bride, a cautionary tale. But the nausea didn't pass. It lingered, along with a dizziness that had nothing to do with emotional trauma. Sarah's knees buckled, and she sank onto the church steps, her white dress pooling around her like spilled milk. Emma was there suddenly, wrapping her in a coat, despite the summer heat, trying to shield her from the smartphones already capturing her humiliation. "I'm taking you to the hospital," Emma declared, her tone brooking no argument. "You've been off for days and this stress." Sarah wanted to protest, but another wave of nausea silenced her. As Emma helped her into a taxi, Sarah caught one last glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. Despite the tears, despite the smeared makeup and disheveled hair, There was something else in her reflection, something in her eyes that spoke of steel beneath the silk, of strength yet to be tested. Later that evening, in a sterile hospital room, Sarah would learn the truth that would change everything. The blood test results were clear. She was pregnant. Not just pregnant, she was carrying quadruplets. 4 tiny lives already growing inside her, blissfully unaware that their father had just abandoned them all. The doctor's words washed over her high-risk pregnancy, necessary precautions, regular monitoring. But all Sarah could think about was the irony. Michael had walked away from one life, not knowing he was really abandoning 5. She pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, feeling a fierce protectiveness surge through her. These babies might not have a father, but they had her, and she would make sure that would be enough. As night fell over New York City, Sarah Matthews sat alone in her hospital room, her wedding dress now folded neatly in a box by her feet. She had stopped crying, stopped shaking, stopped feeling anything except a determined resolve. Tomorrow she would begin again. Tomorrow she would start building a life for 5 instead of 2. Tomorrow would be the first day of a different kind of love story, one she never expected, but one that would prove stronger than any romance. The truth about Stella's role in the wedding's collapse emerged piece by piece, like a dark puzzle assembling itself in Sarah's nightmares. Martha, the Richardson family's housekeeper, was the first to break her silence, arriving at Sarah's apartment 3 days after the failed wedding with a box of evidence and a heart heavy with guilt. "I should have told you sooner," Martha confessed, her weathered hands trembling as she spread out emails, photographs, and handwritten notes across Sarah's kitchen table. Stella wasn't just Michael's assistant. She was Elizabeth Richardson's plant from the beginning, chosen specifically to drive a wedge between you and Michael. The evidence was damning. Emails between Elizabeth and Stella detailed their careful manipulation, scheduled late-night meetings to keep Michael away from Sarah, orchestrated moments of intimacy between Stella and Michael that Sarah was meant to witness, and carefully crafted rumors spread through the company about Sarah's supposed gold-digging intentions. Most devastating were the photographs Stella consoling Michael after manufactured arguments with Sarah, intimate dinners Elizabeth had arranged under the guise of business meetings, and countless moments designed to make Michael question his choice of bride. But it was the final piece of evidence that broke Sarah's heart anew: a contract, signed by Stella, promising her a position as vice president of Richardson Global Enterprises and a significant ownership stake, contingent upon ensuring the wedding never took place. "Elizabeth was convinced you would ruin the Richardson legacy," Martha explained, her voice thick with emotion. "She saw how you challenged Michael to be better, to question the company's old ways. She couldn't bear to see her control over him slipping away." Sarah learned how Stella had played her part masterfully, becoming Michael's confidante while subtly reinforcing his mother's concerns. She would casually mention how Sarah's pro bono work might affect company image, how her independent streak might not suit a Richardson wife, how her background might make certain board members uncomfortable. The morning of the wedding, Stella had made her final move. She showed Michael a fabricated document suggesting Sarah had been investigating the company's finances, preparing for a potential hostile takeover through her law firm. It was a lie, but combined with months of careful manipulation and his mother's constant pressure, it was enough to break Michael's already wavering resolve. He sat in his car for an hour before leaving, Martha revealed, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Stella was with him the whole time, whispering poison in his ear. When he finally decided to leave, she was already typing the message to you on her phone. She'd had it drafted for weeks. Sarah listened to it all with a strange detachment, one hand resting protectively over her stomach where her babies grew. The betrayal was complete, orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. She thought of all the times Stella had smiled at her, had helped with wedding plans, had offered seemingly kind advice. Every moment had been calculated, every interaction designed to lead to her destruction. Martha reached across the table and gripped Sarah's hand. "There's more," she said softly. Elizabeth and Stella. They knew about the pregnancy before you did. Sarah's head snapped up, her free hand instinctively tightening over her stomach. Your doctor's office has a leak. They found out the day before the wedding. That's why they pushed so hard that final morning. They knew if Michael learned about the babies, he would never leave. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. They had known she was carrying Michael's children, 4 innocent lives, and still they had orchestrated this devastating abandonment. The calculated cruelty of it took her breath away. "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Martha straightened, a fierce light in her aged eyes. "Because I've watched that family destroy enough lives with their pride and their legacy. Those babies you're carrying, they're innocent. They deserve to know they were wanted, that their father was lied to. And you, my dear, deserve to know that your love wasn't a mistake. It was stolen from you by people who fear what they can't control." As Martha gathered her evidence and prepared to leave, she turned back one last time. "Elizabeth and Stella think they've won, that you'll slink away in shame. They don't know how strong you are. They don't understand that real love, the kind you have for those babies, is stronger than any legacy." Sarah stood at her window long after Martha left, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over New York. Her hands cradled her stomach, and for the first time since the wedding, she felt something other than despair. She felt rage pure, clarifying rage, and beneath it, a steely determination. Elizabeth Richardson and Stella Evans had orchestrated her heartbreak, but they had underestimated one crucial fact: they weren't just fighting Sarah anymore. They were fighting a mother protecting her children, and that was a force they couldn't possibly comprehend. Sarah's first weeks of pregnancy were a lesson in survival. The morning sickness was relentless, intensified by carrying 4 babies. Her once pristine bathroom became her most frequent refuge. The cold tile floor, her constant companion as waves of nausea racked her body at all hours. She could no longer keep her regular hours at the law firm. The smell of coffee in the office made her dizzy, and the fluorescent lights triggered migraines that left her seeing spots. Her doctor's warnings echoed in her head during sleepless nights. "Quadruplet pregnancies are extremely high risk. You'll need to stop working much sooner than you planned. Complete bed rest may be necessary." The medical bills were already mounting, and her insurance, while good, wasn't designed for such a complex pregnancy. The law firm's managing partner, James Morrison, called her into his office 6 weeks after the failed wedding. His expression was carefully neutral as he explained that, while they valued her contributions, her personal situation might negatively impact client confidence. They offered her a choice: a less visible position with reduced pay, or a generous severance package. Sarah recognized it for what it was: a gentle push out the door. The same ambition that had once made her an asset now made her a liability. She took the severance, knowing she needed to conserve her energy for the battles ahead. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table, calculator in hand, trying to make the numbers work. The severance would cover a few months, but then what? Her savings, meant for a down payment on a house with Michael, would be depleted by medical expenses long before the babies arrived. The first real estate agent laughed when Sarah inquired about 2-bedroom apartments in safe neighborhoods. On a single income, with 4 babies on the way? Honey, you might want to look in New Jersey. The second suggested she reach out to the father for support. The third didn't even return her calls after learning her situation. Sarah finally found a small apartment in Queens, far from her beloved Upper West Side. The elevator was unreliable, and the nearest subway station was a 15-minute walk, but it had 2 tiny bedrooms and a superintendent who didn't ask too many questions. She moved in with only what she could carry, leaving behind the carefully curated life she'd built over the past decade. The loneliness was the hardest part. Her society friends disappeared, not wanting to be associated with such scandal. Law firm colleagues stopped returning her calls, afraid her situation might be contagious. Even Emma, Her closest friend grew distant, uncomfortable with Sarah's new reality of discount maternity clothes and grocery store coupons. One particularly difficult morning, as Sarah struggled to keep down crackers and ginger tea, her phone buzzed with a news alert. There was Michael, smiling on the cover of Business Weekly, announcing Richardson Global's expansion into Asian markets. Stella stood beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. The caption praised their dynamic partnership. Sarah barely made it to the bathroom before losing what little breakfast she'd managed to eat. But that same afternoon, during her ultrasound appointment, something changed. The technician turned the screen, and Sarah saw them 4 tiny hearts beating in perfect synchronization. "They're fighters," the technician said kindly. "Look how they're protecting each other," and they were, positioned so close they appeared to be hugging, their tiny forms creating a perfect circle. That image became Sarah's talisman. She taped the ultrasound photo to her refrigerator, a reminder every time hunger or fatigue or fear threatened to overwhelm her. When her feet swelled so badly she couldn't wear shoes, she looked at that picture. When she had to sell her designer wardrobe on consignment to pay for prenatal vitamins, she touched that grainy image and remembered why it was worth it. She started taking online courses in medical billing, something she could do from home while on bed rest. She joined online support groups for single mothers and mothers of multiples, finding strength in their stories of survival. She learned to cook simple meals, to stretch $1, to find joy in small victories like finding a sale on diapers or managing to eat a full meal. Each night, Sarah would talk to her babies, telling them stories about the family they would become. "We might not have much," she would whisper, rubbing her growing belly, "but we'll have love. We'll have each other. And sometimes that's enough to build a whole world." As her body changed and her world shrank to the size of her small apartment, Sarah discovered a different kind of strength, not the polished confidence of a corporate lawyer, but the raw, primal power of a mother determined to protect her children. She might have lost her perfect life, but she was building something else, something real and unbreakable, one day at a time. The birth of the quadruplets was both a miracle and a marathon. Sarah endured 36 hours of labor, her body fighting to bring 4 new lives into the world. Lucas arrived first, announcing his presence with a robust cry that made the delivery room staff smile. Noah followed 7 minutes later, smaller but equally determined. Liam came next, gripping the doctor's finger with surprising strength. Oliver, the smallest, arrived last, silent at first until Sarah's tearful voice seemed to wake something in him, and he joined his brother's chorus. The first few months were a blur of endless feedings, diaper changes, and sleepless nights. Sarah's tiny apartment became a carefully orchestrated command center, with 4 bassinets arranged in the living room so she could tend to all her sons at once. She learned to feed 2 babies simultaneously, to change diapers with military precision, to function on 20-minute naps stolen between their varying schedules. The boys developed distinct personalities almost immediately. Lucas was the leader, first to smile, first to reach for toys. Noah was the observer, watching everything with serious eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Liam was the peacemaker, somehow sensing when his brothers were distressed. Oliver, though smallest, proved to be the most determined, fighting hardest to hold his head up, to grasp objects, to make his presence known. Sarah documented everything: first smiles, first rolls, first babbles in a journal she kept by her bed. "Dear boys." She would write late at night, "Today Lucas laughed for the first time." Noah watched him like he was studying a new language. Liam tried to copy him, and Oliver just looked annoyed that his nap was interrupted. "You're all so different, yet so connected. You're my miracle times 4. The financial strain was constant. Sarah took on remote legal transcription work, typing with one hand while holding a baby with the other. She learned to shop at discount stores, to accept hand-me-downs from neighbors, to make her own baby food. But her engagement ring, the last remnant of her life with Michael, was sold to pay for a month's worth of specialized formula when the boys showed signs of lactose intolerance. The physical toll was even harder. Sarah lost track of how many days she went without showering, how many meals consisted of crackers eaten over the sink. Her body, once runway ready, now bore the marks of motherhood stretch marks, dark circles under her eyes, hair hastily pulled back in a perpetual ponytail. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw something else, two strengths she never knew she possessed. Martha visited occasionally, bringing home cooked meals and updates from the Richardson world. Michael had been promoted to chairman, with Stella now officially by his side as both VP and fiancée. The news should have hurt, but Sarah was too exhausted to feel anything beyond a distant ache. Her world had narrowed to 4 small beings who needed her more than she needed closure. The breaking point came when all 4 boys got sick simultaneously. High fevers, respiratory distress, the terrifying sound of tiny lungs struggling for air. Sarah rushed them to the emergency room, somehow managing to carry all 4 car seats while fighting her own exhaustion. The pediatrician's words hit her like physical blows. RSV, serious condition, need to be admitted. Insurance coverage limited. For 3 days and nights, Sarah didn't leave the hospital. She moved between 4 small cribs in the pediatric ward, singing lullabies, monitoring oxygen levels, fighting sleep until her body would simply shut down for brief moments. The nurses found her slumped in a chair between the cribs, still holding tiny hands, still murmuring comfort even in her exhausted sleep. When the boys finally recovered, Sarah faced a stack of medical bills that made her knees weak. She had maxed out her credit cards, depleted her savings, and still owed thousands. The hospital's financial aid office suggested she seek child support, but the thought of reaching out to Michael, of having to explain these beautiful boys to someone who had abandoned them before knowing they existed, made her physically ill. Instead, she took another job, virtual paralegal work she could do during the precious few hours when all 4 boys napped. She learned to function on less sleep, to stretch every dollar further, to find reserves of energy she didn't know existed. Her hands cracked from constant washing between diaper changes, her back ached from carrying multiple babies, but still she persisted. One evening, as she sat in their tiny living room surrounded by her sleeping sons, Sarah realized something profound. This overwhelming, exhausting, beautiful chaos was her new normal. These 4 tiny humans had rewritten her definition of success, of strength, of love. The life she had planned with Michael seemed like a distant dream, replaced by something harder but infinitely more precious. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building a family, one sleepless night at a time. The headaches began shortly after the boys' first birthday. At first, Sarah dismissed them as stress and exhaustion, natural consequences of raising 4 toddlers alone while working multiple remote jobs. But when she collapsed during Lucas's first steps, barely managing to break her fall to avoid crushing Noah, who was crawling nearby, she could no longer ignore the warning signs. The free clinic doctor looked concerned as he reviewed her symptoms. The recommendation was clear: she needed an MRI, detailed blood work, and a neurological consultation. Sarah's insurance, already stretched thin by the boys' needs, would barely cover a fraction of the costs. She left with a prescription for pain medication she couldn't afford and a growing sense of dread. Her work performance began to suffer. The law firm she did virtual paralegal work for noticed mistakes in her documentation. The transcription service complained about missed deadlines. Each error meant less income, each missed deadline another opportunity lost. The migraines grew worse, accompanied by dizzy spells that made caring for 4 active toddlers increasingly dangerous. One morning, while preparing the boys' breakfast, her vision blurred completely. She gripped the kitchen counter, fighting unconsciousness, while 4 pairs of eyes watched her with growing concern. "Mama sick?" Liam asked, his small face scrunched with worry. The other boys picked up on their brother's distress, and soon all 4 were crying. Sarah forced herself to remain upright, to smile through the pain, to pretend everything was fine. That evening, after finally getting the boys to sleep, Sarah found an email from her primary employer. Her services would no longer be required due to quality concerns. The timing couldn't have been worse. Rent was due, the pantry was nearly empty, and she had just spent the last of her emergency fund on antibiotics when Oliver developed an ear infection. Martha, stopping by with groceries, found Sarah sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by unpaid bills and rejection letters from job applications. The older woman took one look at Sarah's pale face and swollen eyes and made an executive decision. "You need medical attention," she declared. "I'm watching the boys tomorrow, and you're going to the hospital." The emergency room doctor was direct. Without proper testing and treatment, Sarah's condition could become life-threatening. As she lay in the hospital bed, waiting for test results she couldn't afford, Sarah faced her darkest fear, not death itself, but leaving her boys alone. Who would understand that Lucas needed his blue blanket to sleep? That Noah could only eat if his food didn't touch? That Liam got anxious in crowds? That Oliver needed extra hugs after his nightmares? The diagnosis, when it came, was simultaneously a relief and a terror, a treatable condition, but one requiring immediate intervention and ongoing care. The treatment plan the doctor outlined might as well have been written in another language. All Sarah could see were dollar signs she couldn't possibly afford. Back at home, Sarah tried to maintain normalcy for the boys while secretly selling everything of value she owned. Her designer work clothes, remnants of her corporate life, went first, then her laptop, replaced by a second-hand tablet. Her mother's antique jewelry, saved for so long, was sold piece by piece. Each sale felt like losing a piece of herself, but she had no choice. The final blow came when her landlord informed her that the rent would be increasing significantly. The apartment, small and modest as it was, would soon be beyond her means. The thought of moving 4 toddlers, of starting over yet again, while dealing with her health issues, seemed impossible. That night, after the boys were asleep, Sarah allowed herself 5 minutes of tears. Just 5 minutes to acknowledge the unfairness of it all, to feel the crushing weight of her responsibilities, to wonder how much more she could take. Then she wiped her eyes, opened her laptop, and began researching cheaper neighborhoods, assistance programs, and work-from-home opportunities she could manage around her health issues. As she worked, she heard a small sound from the boys' room. Oliver stood in the doorway, clutching his teddy bear. "Mama," he whispered. Hurt Sarah opened her arms, and he ran to her, followed quickly by his brothers, who seemed to sense their youngest sibling's distress. Soon all 4 boys were piled in her lap, their small hands patting her face, offering the kind of pure love only children can give. Looking at their concerned little faces, Sarah made a silent vow. She would find a way through this. She would get the treatment she needed. She would keep their little family together, because while her body might be failing her, her determination never would. These boys were her miracle, her purpose, her strength, and for them she would fight with everything she had. The autism diagnosis for Oliver came just after the boys turned 2. Sarah had noticed the differences early on: how he avoided eye contact, his intense reactions to certain sounds, his tendency to line up toys in perfect rows. While his brothers babbled and played together, Oliver often retreated into his own world, finding comfort in repetitive movements and strict routines. The developmental pediatrician was gentle but direct. Oliver shows clear signs of autism spectrum disorder. Early intervention is crucial. She handed Sarah a thick packet of information: recommended therapies, specialist referrals, support groups. Each page represented another expense, another commitment, another challenge to somehow meet while juggling 3 other active toddlers and her own health issues. The cost of Oliver's needed therapies was staggering. Speech therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral intervention, none fully covered by her insurance. The specialist recommended 20 hours a week of intensive therapy, a number that made Sarah's head spin. She did the math late at night. Even if she took another job, sold everything she owned, it wouldn't be enough. The other boys, though young, sensed something was different. Lucas became fiercely protective of his youngest brother, interpreting Oliver's needs when words failed him. Noah would sit quietly beside Oliver during his meltdowns, not touching, just being present. Liam learned to warn his brother before making loud noises, instinctively understanding Oliver's sensitivities. Sarah threw herself into research, learning everything she could about autism. She transformed their small apartment into a therapy space, visual schedules on the walls, sensory toys in every corner, picture cards for communication. She learned to anticipate Oliver's triggers, to celebrate his unique way of seeing the world, to find new ways to connect with her silent, beautiful boy. The financial strain became unbearable. Sarah started skipping her own medical treatments to pay for Oliver's therapy. She learned to function through migraines, to hide her dizzy spells, to push through exhaustion. The other boys needed her too. Lucas was showing early reading ability. Noah had developed a passion for art. Liam was struggling with separation anxiety. Each child required individual attention she struggled to provide. One particularly challenging afternoon, Oliver had a massive meltdown in the grocery store. The fluorescent lights, the crowd, the unfamiliar sounds, it was too much. As he screamed and flailed, other shoppers stared and whispered. Sarah could hear their judgments, poor discipline. Shouldn't bring them out. Can't handle 4 kids. Through her tears, she noticed her other sons forming a protective circle around their brother, glaring at the onlookers with fierce loyalty. That evening, after finally getting all 4 boys to sleep, Sarah found Oliver's favorite stuffed elephant torn, a casualty of the day's meltdown. As she sat on the bathroom floor, carefully stitching it back together, her vision blurred with exhaustion and tears. The elephant had been expensive, designed specifically for children with sensory issues. She had bought it with the last of her savings, and now, like everything else in their lives, it was barely holding together. But as she worked, she could hear her boys breathing peacefully in the next room. Oliver's weighted blanket, another specialty purchase she couldn't really afford, had helped him finally settle. Through the baby monitor, she heard him making the soft humming sound that meant he felt safe and content. His brothers had arranged themselves around him as they always did, Lucas closest to the door, ready to protect, Noah and Liam on either side, all of them unconsciously caring for their vulnerable sibling. Martha, who had become their lifeline, arrived the next morning to find Sarah practicing flashcards with Oliver while simultaneously helping Lucas with letters, watching Noah draw, and comforting Liam through a scraped knee. The older woman took in Sarah's pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, the trembling in her hands that signaled another migraine approaching. "You can't do this alone forever," Martha said softly, taking over the flashcards. "These boys need their mother healthy and strong, and Oliver needs more support than you can give alone." Sarah knew she was right. The juggling act was becoming impossible. Oliver needed specialized care she couldn't provide. The other boys needed attention she struggled to give. Her health was deteriorating. Something had to change. That night, after the boys were asleep, Sarah made the hardest decision of her life. She would have to find help, real help, beyond what Martha could provide. The thought of reaching out to Michael, of exposing her children to the world that had rejected them before birth, made her physically ill. But looking at Oliver's peaceful sleeping face, at the way his brothers instinctively curled around him protectively even in sleep, she knew she had to set aside her pride. For Oliver, for all her boys, she would face whatever came next. Their needs had to come before her fears, before her pride, before everything. Michael Richardson's return to Sarah's life wasn't dramatic, no thunderstorm, no chance encounter, no tearful confrontation. Instead, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at Franklin Park, where Sarah took the boys to play after Oliver's therapy session. She was helping Noah build a sandcastle while keeping an eye on Lucas and Liam on the swings, Oliver seated nearby, methodically lining up his toy cars. The familiar voice hit her like a physical blow. Sarah, she looked up to find Michael standing there, impeccably dressed in a business suit that seemed absurdly out of place in the modest neighborhood park. He was staring not at her, but at the four boys, his face a mask of confusion and dawning recognition. The resemblance was undeniable. All four boys had his steel blue eyes, his strong jawline already visible in their toddler features. Lucas, always the protective one, immediately ran to his mother's side, studying the stranger with suspicious eyes. Liam and Noah followed, while Oliver remained focused on his cars, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "They're yours," Sarah said simply, standing to face him. It wasn't a question. She watched as the truth settled over him. 4 lives he had unknowingly abandoned that day at the church. His face paled, and for a moment she thought he might collapse. "Quadruplets," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "How?" When he trailed off, mathematical calculations clearly running through his mind, matching dates to possibilities until the truth became undeniable. "I found out the day you left," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "About an hour after your assistant texted to cancel our wedding." The bitterness in her voice made Lucas grip her hand tighter, sensing his mother's distress. Michael took a step forward, then stopped as all 3 standing boys moved closer to their mother. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, and for a moment Sarah saw a flash of the man she had loved, vulnerable, uncertain, human. "Tell you," she laughed, "but there was no humor in it. Should I have chased after your car, called your office where Stella was already installed as your personal assistant, begged your mother for an audience?" She took a deep breath, conscious of her son's eyes on her. "You made your choice, Michael. I made mine." He looked at each boy in turn, his gaze lingering on Oliver, who had begun rocking slightly, overwhelmed by the charged atmosphere. "What are their names?" he asked softly. Before Sarah could answer, Lucas stepped forward, chin raised defiantly. "I'm Lucas," he announced. "That's Noah and Liam. And Oliver's our brother, but he doesn't like strangers." The pride and protectiveness in his young voice made Sarah's heart swell. Michael knelt to Lucas's level, but the boy backed away, returning to his mother's side. "They're beautiful," Sarah, Michael said, standing again. "They're perfect. I had no idea." "No, you didn't," Sarah agreed. "And now you do. That's all there is to say." She began gathering the boys' toys, signaling that the conversation was over. But Michael wasn't finished. "We need to talk about this," he insisted. "They're my sons too. I have rights." Sarah straightened, maternal instinct flaring. "Rights?" Her voice was low, dangerous. "Were you there when I was put on bed rest at 6 months? When I had to choose between buying groceries or prenatal vitamins? When Oliver was diagnosed with autism and I had to fight insurance companies alone?" Each question made Michael flinch, but she continued. "Where were your rights when they had their first words, first steps, first fevers?" "I want to make it right," Michael said, reaching into his jacket for his business card. "My lawyers will be in touch. We can work out custody, support, visitation." "Lawyers?" Sarah interrupted, gathering her boys closer. "That's your solution? More lawyers? More contracts? More business deals?" She shook her head. "These aren't merger documents, Michael. These are children, your children, who have never known their father because he chose his mother's approval over their existence." Oliver chose that moment to become overwhelmed, his quiet humming escalating into distress. Sarah immediately went to him, her movements practiced and gentle, while his brothers formed a protective circle around them both. The scene said more than words could. This was a family, bonded by love and hardship, complete in their incompleteness. Michael watched, clearly unsure how to react to Oliver's distress. "Is he okay?" he asked awkwardly. "He will be," Sarah replied, not looking up from soothing her youngest. "He always is, because he has us. Because we've learned to be okay together." When she finally looked up again, Michael had composed himself back into the businessman she barely recognized. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers," he said, his tone professional now. "We can handle this civilly, or we can handle it in court. Your choice." Sarah stood, Oliver calm now in her arms, his brothers still flanking them protectively. Handle it however you want, Michael. But remember this, these boys aren't a problem to be handled. They're not a situation to be managed. They're children who have survived and thrived without you. So before you send your lawyers, ask yourself what you're really fighting for: your rights or your redemption. She watched him walk away, his expensive shoes inappropriate for the park's gravel paths, his straight back a reminder of the man she'd once loved. Only when he was completely gone did she allow herself to shake, to feel the full impact of what had just happened. Mama Lucas tugged at her sleeve. Who was that man? Sarah looked at her sons, Lucas curious, Noah watchful, Liam concerned, Oliver peaceful again in her arms. How could she explain? How could she tell them that the stranger in the suit was the other half of their story? That, she said finally, was someone who made a mistake a long time ago, but his mistake gave me the 4 greatest gifts in the world. She hugged them close, breathing in their familiar scents. Now, who wants ice cream? As they walked home, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Michael Richardson had resources she couldn't match, connections she couldn't fight, and now, a reason to use them. But looking at her boys, she also knew this: some things were worth any battle, and she had already proven she would fight for what mattered most. Stella's campaign against Sarah began subtly at first. Anonymous complaints to Child Protective Services about the boys' living conditions. Sudden issues with Sarah's lease renewal. Mysterious calls to Oliver's therapy center questioning payment arrangements. Each incident seemed isolated until Martha connected the dots. She's trying to build a case, Martha explained one evening, after helping Sarah deal with yet another surprise inspection from city services, making you look unstable, unfit. Elizabeth's backing her, they're using Richardson money to try to take the boys. The truth of Stella's involvement emerged through a series of calculated moves. She began appearing at Oliver's therapy center, claiming to be researching facilities for Richardson Global's charitable foundation. She was spotted near the boys' preschool, taking photos from her car. Even the park where they played became unsafe, with suspicious strangers asking the boys questions when Sarah's attention was divided. One morning, Sarah found an envelope in her mailbox containing photos: her stumbling during a migraine episode, Oliver having a meltdown at the store, the boys wearing hand-me-down clothes. Attached was a note: do you really think you can give them the life they deserve? The message was clear: Stella was building ammunition. The psychological warfare escalated. Rumors began circulating at the boys' preschool about Sarah's health issues. Other parents suddenly stopped inviting the boys to playdates. The director pulled Sarah aside one day, apologetically explaining that concerns had been raised about Oliver's effect on other children. She's trying to isolate us, Sarah realized, watching her sons play alone in the corner of the playground, make it look like we have no support system. Stella's most devastating move came during one of Oliver's therapy sessions. Sarah arrived to find a new therapist waiting instead of their usual one. The woman, clearly uncomfortable, explained that their regular therapist had accepted a position at an exclusive facility, one owned by Richardson Global's healthcare division. She's picking us apart, piece by piece, Sarah confided to Martha that evening. Taking away everything that helps us function. Martha held her as she finally broke down, careful to cry quietly so the boys wouldn't hear. The campaign affected the boys differently. Lucas became more protective, refusing to leave his brother's side at school. Noah stopped drawing, his usual artistic outlet silenced by anxiety. Liam developed nightmares, crawling into Sarah's bed every night. Only Oliver seemed unchanged, his routine-driven world a sanctuary from the chaos around them. Stella's appearances became more brazen. She showed up at Sarah's apartment building, wearing designer clothes that made Sarah's worn jeans and t-shirt feel like a statement of inadequacy. Michael only wants what's best for his sons, she would say, her voice dripping with false concern. We can provide them with everything they need: the best schools, the best doctors, the best opportunities. The implied threat was clear: Sarah's love wasn't enough. The boys needed material advantages she couldn't provide. Each encounter left her feeling smaller, more inadequate, more afraid. The final straw came when Stella orchestrated a meeting with Oliver's developmental pediatrician. Sarah arrived for a routine appointment to find Stella already there, speaking intimately with the doctor. "We're discussing treatment options available through Richardson Global's medical network," Stella explained smoothly. Options that could help Oliver tremendously with the right custody arrangement, of course. Sarah fled the office, Oliver in her arms, his brothers trailing behind. That evening, as she watched her sons sleep, their faces peaceful despite the storm raging around them, she made a decision. She wouldn't let Stella destroy what they had built. She began documenting everything, every mysterious phone call, every suspicious incident, every appearance by Stella. She took photos of the boys' achievements, their artwork, their happy moments together. She collected statements from neighbors who had witnessed their daily life, from teachers who had seen the boys thrive despite their challenges. "You're not just fighting Stella," Martha warned. "You're fighting the whole Richardson machine. They have unlimited resources, connections in every corner of society." But Sarah had something they didn't understand: the fierce determination of a mother protecting her children. She might not have money or power, but she had truth on her side. She had 4 little boys who needed her to be stronger than her fear. One night, as she added another incident to her growing documentation, Oliver climbed into her lap, something he rarely did voluntarily. He touched her face with gentle fingers, a gesture he used to show love. One by one, his brothers joined them, creating a circle of small arms and unconditional love. "We okay, Mama?" Lucas asked, his young face serious. Sarah hugged them close, breathing in their familiar scents: peanut butter and crayon wax, sandbox sand and baby shampoo. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "We're more than okay. We're together." Let Stella play her games, Sarah thought. Let her try to break them apart with money and power and false concerns. She didn't understand that some things couldn't be bought or manipulated, like the way Noah knew exactly how to calm Oliver during a meltdown, or how Liam always saved his favorite cookies for his brothers, or how Lucas read bedtime stories to them all, making up words he couldn't yet read. These were the things worth fighting for. These were the moments Stella could never understand or replicate, no matter how many resources she commanded. Sarah might be outgunned in terms of money and influence, but she had something far more powerful: the unbreakable bonds of a family forged in adversity. As she tucked her boys back into bed that night, Sarah silently renewed her promise to them. Stella might have the Richardson name and fortune behind her, but Sarah had love and truth on her side, and in the end she had to believe that would be enough. The court battles began in early spring, just as the boys were mastering their first bicycles. Sarah sat in the imposing courthouse, her threadbare suit a stark contrast to Michael and Stella's designer attire. The initial hearing set the tone for what would follow: a war of resources versus resilience. Michael's lawyers presented a devastating case. They highlighted Sarah's financial struggles, her health issues, the challenges of raising 4 children alone, and particularly Oliver's special needs. They painted a picture of a mother overwhelmed, unable to provide the advantages the Richardson name could offer. "My clients can provide these children with every opportunity," their lead attorney argued. "Private schools, specialized therapy for Oliver, summer homes, trust funds, advantages every child deserves." The judge listened intently as they outlined plans for the boys' future, plans that notably didn't include Sarah. When Sarah's court-appointed lawyer stood to speak, she felt her heart sink. The young man, though well-meaning, was clearly outmatched by the Richardson legal team. His arguments about maternal bonds and emotional well-being seemed weak against their promises of material prosperity. But then something unexpected happened. The boys' preschool teacher, Mrs. Thompson, requested to testify. Despite obvious intimidation from the Richardson lawyers, she spoke firmly about what she'd observed. "These boys are the most well-adjusted children in my class," she stated. "They show remarkable empathy, especially with Oliver. They work together, support each other. That doesn't come from money, it comes from exceptional parenting." The court-appointed child psychologist was next. Separating these children from their mother would be traumatic, she testified. They formed a unique bond, not just mother and sons, but as a unit. They've developed coping mechanisms, support systems. Breaking that apart could cause irreparable harm. Still, the Richardson influence was powerful. Each hearing brought new experts testifying about the advantages of wealth, the importance of a father's presence, the benefits of private education. Sarah watched helplessly as her children's future was debated in terms of dollars and opportunities rather than love and stability. The lowest point came when Stella took the stand, perfectly groomed and articulate. "We're only thinking of the children," she claimed, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "They deserve the Richardson legacy. Sarah's done her best, but love isn't enough. These boys need advantages only we can provide." During a particularly grueling cross-examination, Sarah was forced to admit she'd skipped her own medical treatments to pay for Oliver's therapy. The Richardson lawyers pounced, painting her as martyr who prioritized one child over the others. That evening she found Lucas trying to empty his piggy bank. "For your medicine, Mama," he explained, his small face serious. "So the mean people can't say you're sick anymore." Sarah held him close, tears streaming down her face, knowing that no trust fund could match the wealth of her son's heart. The case dragged on, draining Sarah's limited resources and energy. She sold her engagement ring, her last valuable possession, to pay for expert testimony about Oliver's progress. The boys began showing signs of stress. Noah stopped speaking above a whisper. Liam developed separation anxiety. Lucas became aggressive at school. Only Oliver, ironically, remained stable, his routine providing anchor in the chaos. Martha testified about the day-to-day life she witnessed in Sarah's home. "I've worked for wealthy families all my life," she told the court. "I've never seen children more loved, more secure, more truly happy than these boys. Money can't buy what Sarah gives them." But the turning point came from an unexpected source. During one hearing, Oliver had a meltdown in the courthouse hallway. The fluorescent lights, the tension, the break-in routine, it was too much. While Michael and Stella watched uncomfortably from a distance, Sarah went into action. She knew exactly what Oliver needed, the pressure point on his hand that helped him calm down, the specific words to whisper, the way to position herself to block overwhelming stimuli. More remarkable was how his brothers responded. Without prompting, Lucas began humming Oliver's favorite song. Noah retrieved the weighted blanket from their emergency bag. Liam created a small barrier with his body, protecting his brother from curious onlookers. It was a choreographed dance of love and understanding developed through countless similar moments. The judge witnessed it all. The next day, he requested a private meeting with the boys. When Lucas proudly showed him the picture system they used to help Oliver communicate, when Noah demonstrated how they played games that included all four of them, when Liam explained their bedtime routine, the human cost of separation became clear. "Your Honor," Sarah's lawyer argued in his closing statement, "the Richardson family can offer these boys many things, but they cannot offer the profound bond these children have developed with their mother and each other. They cannot replicate the support system these brothers have created. They cannot buy the kind of love that turns four individual children into one unshakable unit." The judge's expression was unreadable as he listened to final arguments. Sarah sat straight-backed in her chair, knowing that everything she held dear hung on his decision. Michael and Stella sat confidently on their side, surrounded by their legal team, seemingly certain that their resources would prevail. But Sarah held on to hope. She remembered Oliver's first words, delayed but precious. She remembered how Lucas learned to read early so he could help with his brother's bedtime stories. She remembered Noah's drawings of their family, 5 stick figures always holding hands. She remembered Liam's fierce hugs and whispered, "I love you, Mama S." These were the moments no amount of money could buy, the bonds no court could sever, the love no legal document could define. As she waited for the judge's decision, Sarah held these memories close, praying they would be enough to keep her family together. The future of 5 intertwined lives rested in one man's hands, and Sarah could only hope he would see what truly mattered, not the size of a bank account or the prestige of a family name, but the unbreakable bonds of a family built on love, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. The final day of the custody hearing dawned cold and grey. Sarah arrived early, her hands trembling as she helped the boys with their coats. They were dressed in their best clothes second-hand, but carefully pressed, their shoes polished, hair neatly combed. Lucas carried his favorite book, Noah clutched his drawing pad, Liam held his comfort blanket, and Oliver wore his noise-cancelling headphones, a gift from their neighbors who had pooled money to buy them. The courtroom was packed. On one side sat the Richardson contingent, Michael, Stella, Elizabeth, their army of lawyers and various business associates there to testify about the family's resources. On the other side sat Sarah's supporters, Martha, Mrs. Thompson, therapists, neighbors, and even the grocery store owner who had often let Sarah delay payment when money was tight. The proceedings began with what seemed to be the final nail in Sarah's coffin. Michael's lead attorney presented a comprehensive plan for the boys' future enrollment in prestigious private schools, a specially designed therapy program for Oliver at an exclusive facility, a mansion with separate rooms for each child, full-time nannies, and trust funds that would ensure their financial security for life. Furthermore, the attorney announced, Mr. Richardson is prepared to purchase a suitable residence for Ms. Matthews within reasonable distance, allowing her liberal visitation rights, while ensuring the children have the advantages of the Richardson name and resources. Sarah felt the room spin. They weren't just trying to take her children, they were trying to buy her compliance with a gilded cage. Before she could respond, Martha suddenly stood up, her aged frame straight and dignified. "Your Honor, I request permission to present new evidence," Martha announced, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The Richardson lawyers immediately objected, but Martha continued, "Evidence of deliberate manipulation and conspiracy against Ms. Matthews from the very beginning." The judge, intrigued by Martha's obvious distress, overruled the objections. Martha walked forward, carrying a worn leather briefcase. "I've worked for the Richardson family for 30 years, she began. "I was there the day of the wedding. I was there when Elizabeth Richardson and Stella Evans plotted to separate Michael from Sarah. And I was there when they discovered her pregnancy and chose to hide it." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Michael's head snapped up, his face draining of color. Stella gripped the table, her knuckles white. Elizabeth Richardson rose halfway from her seat before her lawyer pulled her back down. Martha opened her briefcase, removing a stack of documents. Emails between Mrs. Richardson and Ms. Evans, planning how to convince Michael that Sarah was unsuitable. Bank statements showing payments to Sarah's former doctor's office employee for information about her pregnancy. Recordings of conversations where they discussed ensuring the wedding never took place. She placed a USB drive on the judge's desk. "And here, Your Honor, is security footage from the Richardson estate the morning of the wedding. Footage showing Mrs. Richardson and Ms. Evans convincing Michael that Sarah was investigating the company for a hostile takeover. Footage showing them deliberately hiding the news of her pregnancy." Michael stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. "Mother," his voice cracked. "Stella, is this true?" Elizabeth Richardson remained silent, her face a mask of cold dignity. But Stella, perhaps sensing the tide turning, rose to her feet. "Everything we did was for your own good, Michael. Sarah wasn't right for the Richardson name. She would have ruined everything your father built." They knew. Michael turned to Martha, his voice barely a whisper. "They knew about the babies." Martha nodded solemnly. "They found out the day before the wedding. They were afraid you'd never leave if you knew. Evans here suggested that the pregnancy made it even more imperative to end things quickly. The judge leaned forward, studying the documents. "Mrs. Hudson," he addressed Martha, "you understand that by presenting this evidence, you're admitting to being party to these actions." "Yes, Your Honor," Martha replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I've carried this guilt for years, watching Sarah struggle alone, watching those beautiful boys grow up without their father because of our deception. I cannot remain silent any longer. Fire me, prosecute me, but please let the truth be known." Sarah sat frozen, years of pain and struggle crystallizing into this moment. She watched as Michael read through the emails, his hands shaking. She saw Stella's perfectly composed facade crumbling as her machinations were exposed. She observed Elizabeth Richardson's face, still proud but now tinged with fear. But mostly she watched her boys. Lucas had moved closer to her, his small hand finding hers. Noah was drawing rapidly in his pad, perhaps trying to make sense of the adult drama unfolding before him. Liam had curled into her other side, his comfort blanket wrapped tight around his shoulders, and Oliver, remarkably, had removed his headphones, his eyes fixed on Michael with an intensity she'd never seen before. The judge called a brief recess to review Martha's evidence. As the courtroom cleared, Michael approached Sarah's table, his face haunted. "I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking. "Sarah, I swear I didn't know about the babies. I would never have." Daddy Oliver's voice, clear and unexpected, cut through the tension. It was the first word he had spoken in court, perhaps the first time he had ever used that word. Everyone froze, watching as Oliver stood, examining Michael with that peculiar intensity unique to him. The simple word, spoken by the child who struggled most with speech, seemed to shatter something in Michael. He sank into a nearby chair, tears streaming down his face. The mighty CEO of Richardson Global, undone by a single word from the son he had never known he had. As the bailiff called everyone back into the courtroom, Sarah held her breath. The truth was finally out, but would it be enough? Would justice prevail over wealth and influence? She gathered her boys close, drawing strength from their unwavering trust in her, preparing herself for whatever came next. Martha's testimony continued with devastating precision, each revelation more damning than the last. She produced a recording of Elizabeth Richardson on the morning of the wedding the girl is carrying his child, Stella. "If Michael finds out, all our plans are ruined. You know what to do." Stella's voice responded coolly, "Leave it to me. I'll make sure he's gone before anyone can tell him." The pregnancy makes this even more urgent. We can't have Richardson blood raised by someone so common. Michael sat with his head in his hands as Martha played the recordings. Each word seemed to physically pain him, decades of manipulation exposed in cruel clarity. Stella had moved away from the Richardson table, sensing her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "There's more," Martha continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. She produced a series of emails detailing the systematic campaign to isolate Sarah after the wedding. They hired private investigators to track her, paid people to refuse her employment, even arranged for her first apartment's lease to be terminated when she was 7 months pregnant. The judge examined document after document, his expression growing darker. "Mrs. Hudson, why come forward now, after all these years?" Martha looked at the 4 boys, her eyes filling with tears. "Because I watched Sarah fight for these children when everyone else abandoned them. I watched her go hungry so they could eat, sell her treasures so Oliver could get therapy, work herself to exhaustion so they could have a better life. And I watched these 2 women." She pointed at Elizabeth and Stella, try to destroy her simply because she wasn't born into their world. Elizabeth Richardson finally broke her silence, rising with regal indignation. "Everything I did was to protect the Richardson legacy. These children may carry our blood, but their mother would never understand our traditions, our responsibilities." Traditions, Sarah found her voice, standing to face her former almost mother-in-law. "Like abandoning your own grandchildren. like watching them struggle and doing nothing. Those are the traditions you wanted to protect. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah continued, her voice gathering strength. You talk about legacy. Mrs. Richardson, let me tell you about legacy. Legacy is Lucas learning to read early so he could help his brothers. Legacy is Noah drawing pictures to help Oliver communicate. Legacy is Liam sharing his favorite toys to make his siblings smile. That's the legacy I built with your grandchildren. Without your money, without your name, without your help. Martha produced her final piece of evidence, a recent video of Stella meeting with a private investigator, planning to fabricate evidence of Sarah's unfitness as a mother. We need something concrete, Stella said in the recording. Something that will force the judge to see she can't handle 4 children, especially one with special needs. Michael stood abruptly, his face ashen. Enough, he said, his voice breaking. Mother, Stella, enough, he turned to Sarah, years of regret etched on his face. I was a coward. I let them manipulate me, control me, blind me to what really mattered. Stella attempted one last defense, Michael. Everything I did was for us, for your future. These children deserve better than a tiny apartment and second-hand clothes. They deserve the Richardson life. No, Michael replied, finally finding his strength. They deserve their mother. They deserve the love and stability she's given them. They deserve the truth. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to withdraw my petition for custody. Elizabeth Richardson gasped. Michael, you can't. Think of your father's legacy. I am thinking of legacy, Michael responded. Not the legacy of bank accounts and boardrooms, but the legacy of love and courage I see in these 4 boys and their mother. The judge surveyed the courtroom, his gaze lingering on each face. Elizabeth Richardson, proud even in defeat. Stella Evans, her perfectly crafted world shattered. Michael, standing alone for perhaps the first time in his life. Martha finally unburdened of her secrets. And Sarah, surrounded by her sons, the only true family unit in the chaos. Oliver, who had been quiet throughout the proceedings, suddenly walked over to Martha and took her hand, a gesture of profound trust from a child who rarely initiated contact. The elderly housekeeper broke down, years of guilt and regret pouring out in quiet sobs. The other boys followed their brother's lead. Lucas, ever the protector, stood between his family and the Richardson side of the room. Noah began drawing again, his pencil flying across the paper as he captured the scene unfolding before him. Liam wrapped his comfort blanket around Martha's shoulders, offering the same solace she had so often given them. In that moment, the truth became clear to everyone in the courtroom. These children didn't need the Richardson name or fortune. They had something far more valuable, an unshakable foundation of love, built by a mother who had given everything for them and strengthened by the very adversity meant to break them apart. The judge cleared his throat, preparing to deliver his ruling, but the outcome seemed almost secondary now. The real victory was written in the way Sarah's boys clustered around her, in the defeat on Stella's face, in Michael's dawning understanding of what he had lost and perhaps what he might yet have a chance to redeem. Michael's confrontation with Stella unfolded in the courthouse hallway, their voices echoing off the marble walls. The boys had been escorted to a private room with Martha, leaving the adults to face the aftermath of the revelations. How long, Michael demanded, his voice trembling with barely controlled rage. How long have you been working with my mother to destroy Sarah's life? Stella maintained her composure, though her perfectly manicured hands betrayed her nervousness as they fidgeted with her designer purse. Everything I did was for you, for us. Sarah was never right for the Richardson name. She would have changed you, weakened you. Changed me, Michael's laugh was bitter. Into what? A father who actually knew his children. A man who made his own decisions. He paced the hallway, running his hands through his hair in frustration. You watched me suffer for 5 years, thinking I'd made the right choice, while you knew about my children. Elizabeth Richardson attempted to intervene, her aristocratic bearing incongruous with the desperation in her voice. Michael, darling, try to understand. The Richardson name carries responsibilities, expectations. Sarah's background, her common upbringing. Michael whirled to face his mother. The woman you dismissed as common has raised 4 extraordinary boys on her own. She's given them everything while we, the mighty Richardsons, gave them nothing but obstacles. Sarah stood quietly, watching the family she'd once hoped to join implode. The sight of Michael finally standing up to his mother and Stella should have felt like vindication, but all she felt was a profound sadness for the years lost, the memories that could never be reclaimed. Stella made one final attempt to salvage her position. Think about what you're throwing away, Michael. Everything we've built together, the future we planned. All for what? A woman who couldn't even provide proper therapy for your autistic son. The slap echoed through the hallway. Everyone froze, staring at Michael's raised hand and Stella's shocked face. He hadn't struck her, but the gesture had come terrifyingly close. "Don't you dare," he whispered, his voice deadly quiet. "Don't you dare speak about Oliver, about any of my sons, ever again." Sarah stepped forward then, placing herself between Michael and Stella. "Violence isn't the answer," she said firmly. "It never is. That's one of the first things I taught our boys. The word are hung in the air, heavy with meaning." Michael stepped back, shame replacing anger on his face. "I'm sorry," he said, though it wasn't clear to whom he was apologizing. I've missed so much. First steps, first words, first everything. And you." He turned to Stella and his mother. "You stole that from me, from them." Elizabeth drew herself up, trying to maintain her dignity. "We did what we thought was best for the Richardson legacy." "Legacy?" Michael's voice cracked. "I just watched Oliver, the son you tried to hide from me, the son you claimed couldn't fit into our world, show more compassion in one gesture than you have in a lifetime. That's legacy, Mother. That's the Richardson name I want to be associated with." Stella gathered her belongings, her mask of sophistication finally crumbling. "You'll regret this, Michael. When the novelty wears off, when you realize what you're giving up." "The only thing I regret," Michael interrupted, "is not seeing through you years ago. Both of you," he watched as Stella walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor, each step taking with it another piece of his old life. Elizabeth made one last attempt. "Michael, please. Everything I did was out of love." "No, Mother. Everything you did was out of control. Love doesn't manipulate. Love doesn't hide children from their father. Love doesn't try to destroy a mother fighting for her children." He turned away from her, physically and symbolically rejecting everything she represented. Sarah watched as Michael's shoulders slumped, the weight of his realizations finally hitting him. Without thinking, she touched his arm, the first voluntary contact between them in 5 years. "The boys are waiting," she said softly. "They'll want to know what happens next." Michael looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time seeing not the young lawyer he'd abandoned, but the strong mother she'd become. "What does happen next, Sarah? How do I even begin to make this right?" Sarah thought of her sons Lucas's protective nature, Noah's quiet strength, Liam's generous heart, Oliver's unique way of seeing the world. "We start with the truth," she said. "We tell them everything, answer their questions, and let them decide what role they want you to play in their lives." "And you," Michael asked hesitantly, "after everything that's happened, everything I let happen, could you ever forgive me?" Sarah looked down the hallway where Stella had disappeared, then at Elizabeth standing alone with her pride in tatters, and finally back at Michael. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn once," she said. "It's something you work for every day. Are you ready for that?" Before Michael could answer, they heard Oliver's voice calling Mama from the private room. The moment of truth had arrived. It was time to face their children, to begin the complicated process of healing, to start building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. As they walked toward the room together, Sarah realized that this wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of another. One that would require all of them, Michael, herself, and most importantly, their boys to learn what family really means, beyond names and legacies and social expectations. The real test was just beginning. The collapse came without warning. Sarah was helping Oliver with his therapy exercises while the other boys did their homework at the kitchen table. One moment she was demonstrating a new communication technique, the next she was on the floor, her vision blurring, pain radiating through her chest. Lucas, with the quick thinking that had become his trademark, grabbed her phone and dialed 911, just as they'd practiced. Noah gathered Oliver's comfort items, keeping him calm as their brother's anxiety threatened to spiral. Liam held her hand, tears streaming down his face, whispering, "Stay awake, Mama, please stay awake." The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and frightened faces. Martha, summoned by Lucas's second call, arrived at the hospital to find all 4 boys huddled together in the waiting room. Oliver, overwhelmed by the chaos, had retreated into himself, rocking back and forth. His brothers formed a protective circle around him, shielding him from the harsh hospital lights and curious stares. The diagnosis was devastating. The condition Sarah had been neglecting in favor of paying for Oliver's therapy had progressed significantly. "If you'd come in when we first detected it," the doctor said, his face grave, "we could have treated this easily. Now." He left the sentence unfinished, but his expression said everything. Michael arrived within hours of being notified, his face pale with shock. He found his sons curled up together on a too-small hospital sofa, Lucas trying to read a story to keep them calm, though his voice kept breaking. The sight of their fierce independence, their instinctive need to protect each other, hit him like a physical blow. This was what he had missed, this unshakable bond forged through years of having only each other to rely on. "The boys need to go home. Get some rest," Martha suggested gently, but all 4 children adamantly refused to leave. Oliver, who rarely spoke in stressful situations, suddenly became vocal. "Stay with Mama," he insisted, his voice firm despite his obvious distress. The night passed in a sterile waiting room, with Michael watching his sons navigate a crisis with practiced efficiency. Lucas knew exactly what snacks each brother would eat when stressed. Noah had packed Oliver's weighted blanket without being asked. Liam remembered all their mother's emergency contact numbers. They functioned as a unit, each filling roles they had clearly played before. When Sarah finally regained consciousness, her first words were about the boys. "Oliver has therapy tomorrow," she whispered, trying to sit up despite her weakness. "Lucas has a spelling test. Noah needs his art supplies for class. Liam's afraid of the dark. He needs his nightlight." The doctor's update was blunt. Without immediate treatment, expensive treatment, Sarah's condition would continue to deteriorate, treatment that would require her to be hospitalized for weeks, maybe months. Treatment they couldn't possibly afford. Michael immediately offered to pay for everything, but Sarah's response was unexpected. "The boys," she said, her voice barely audible. "Promise me you'll keep them together. Promise me you won't separate them, even if." She couldn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. That night, as Sarah slept fitfully under harsh hospital lights, the true tragedy of their situation became clear. This wasn't just about a mother's illness. It was about 4 little boys watching their entire world teeter on the brink of collapse. It was about a family that had survived abandonment, poverty, and prejudice, now facing their greatest challenge yet. Lucas, ever the protector, tried to explain to his brothers what was happening. "Mama's very sick," he said, his young voice struggling to stay steady. "But she's strong. She's the strongest person ever, right?" He looked at Michael as he said this, desperate for confirmation. Michael, confronted with his son's need for reassurance, felt the weight of his 5-year absence crush him. How could he comfort these children he barely knew? How could he step into the role of protector when he had failed them for so long? Noah silently drew picture after picture Sarah in her hospital bed, but surrounded by butterflies and flowers. Liam cried quietly into his comfort blanket. Oliver, in his own way of processing, methodically arranged his toys in perfect lines on the hospital room windowsill. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah's condition remained critical. The boys had finally fallen asleep, tangled together on the hospital room's small couch. Michael watched them, these 4 precious lives he had nearly lost, and made a silent vow. He couldn't change the past, couldn't erase his mistakes, but he could fight for their future if only they would give him the chance. But first they had to face the possibility of losing the one person who had never left them, who had fought for them when no one else would, who had built their world with love and sacrifice. The tragedy wasn't just Sarah's illness, it was the potential shattering of a family that had already endured so much. The collapse came without warning. Sarah was helping Oliver with his therapy exercises while the other boys did their homework at the kitchen table. One moment she was demonstrating a new communication technique. The next she was on the floor, her vision blurring, pain radiating through her chest. Lucas, with the quick thinking that had become his trademark, grabbed her phone and dialed 911 just as they'd practiced. Noah gathered Oliver's comfort items, keeping him calm as their brother's anxiety threatened to spiral. Liam held her hand, tears streaming down his face, whispering, "Stay awake, Mama. Please stay awake." The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and frightened faces. Martha, summoned by Lucas's second call, arrived at the hospital to find all 4 boys huddled together in the waiting room. Oliver, overwhelmed by the chaos, had retreated into himself, rocking back and forth. His brothers formed a protective circle around him, shielding him from the harsh hospital lights and curious stares. The diagnosis was devastating. The condition Sarah had been neglecting in favor of paying for Oliver's therapy had progressed significantly. "If you'd come in when we first detected it," the doctor said, his face grave, "we could have treated this easily. Now." He left the sentence unfinished, but his expression said everything. Michael arrived within hours of being notified, his face pale with shock. He found his sons curled up together on a too small hospital sofa, Lucas trying to read a story to keep them calm, though his voice kept breaking. The sight of their fierce independence, their instinctive need to protect each other, hit him like a physical blow. This was what he had missed, this unshakable bond forged through years of having only each other to rely on. "The boys need to go home. Get some rest," Martha suggested gently. But all 4 children adamantly refused to leave. Oliver, who rarely spoke in stressful situations, suddenly became vocal. "Stay with Mama," he insisted, his voice firm despite his obvious distress. The night passed in a sterile waiting room, with Michael watching his sons navigate a crisis with practiced efficiency. Lucas knew exactly what snacks each brother would eat when stressed. Noah had packed Oliver's weighted blanket without being asked. Liam remembered all their mother's emergency contact numbers. They functioned as a unit, each filling roles they had clearly played before. When Sarah finally regained consciousness, her first words were about the boys. "Oliver has therapy tomorrow," she whispered, trying to sit up despite her weakness. "Lucas has a spelling test. Noah needs his art supplies for class. Liam's afraid of the dark. He needs his nightlight." The doctor's update was blunt. Without immediate treatment, expensive treatment, Sarah's condition would continue to deteriorate. Treatment that would require her to be hospitalized for weeks, maybe months. Treatment they couldn't possibly afford. Michael immediately offered to pay for everything, but Sarah's response was unexpected. "The boys," she said, her voice barely audible. "Promise me you'll keep them together. Promise me you won't separate them, even if..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. That night, as Sarah slept fitfully under harsh hospital lights, the true tragedy of their situation became clear. This wasn't just about a mother's illness, it was about 4 little boys watching their entire world teeter on the brink of collapse. It was about a family that had survived abandonment, poverty, and prejudice, now facing their greatest challenge yet. Lucas, ever the protector, tried to explain to his brothers what was happening. "Mama's very sick," he said, his young voice struggling to stay steady. "But she's strong. She's the strongest person ever, right? He looked at Michael as he said this, desperate for confirmation. Michael, confronted with his son's need for reassurance, felt the weight of his 5-year absence crush him. How could he comfort these children he barely knew? How could he step into the role of protector when he had failed them for so long? Noah silently drew picture after picture Sarah in her hospital bed, but surrounded by butterflies and flowers. Liam cried quietly into his comfort blanket. Oliver, in his own way of processing, methodically arranged his toys in perfect lines on the hospital room windowsill. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah's condition remained critical. The boys had finally fallen asleep, tangled together on the hospital room's small couch. Michael watched them, these 4 precious lives he had nearly lost, and made a silent vow. He couldn't change the past, couldn't erase his mistakes, but he could fight for their future if only they would give him the chance. But first they had to face the possibility of losing the one person who had never left them, who had fought for them when no one else would, who had built their world with love and sacrifice. The tragedy wasn't just Sarah's illness, it was the potential shattering of a family that had already endured so much. The boys' struggle with their mother's illness manifested in different ways, each child processing the potential loss through the lens of their unique personalities. The hospital staff watched in quiet admiration as these young children demonstrated a maturity far beyond their years, each adapting to maintain their family's delicate balance even as their world threatened to crumble. Lucas took on even more responsibility, essentially becoming a miniature parent to his brothers. He memorized the hospital's visiting hours, learned the names of every nurse on Sarah's floor, and created a schedule to ensure one of them was always holding their mother's hand. At night, he would whisper to his sleeping brothers, making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "Mama will be okay. We'll all go home soon. Everything will be fine." Noah stopped speaking almost entirely, communicating instead through his drawings. He filled notebook after notebook with pictures Sarah teaching them to ride bikes, reading bedtime stories, making pancakes on Sunday mornings. The hospital walls became a gallery of his artwork, each piece a prayer for his mother's recovery rendered in crayon and colored pencil. Liam's separation anxiety reached new heights. He became physically ill if forced to leave the hospital, crying until he made himself sick. The child psychologist explained it as a natural response to potential loss. Liam was terrified that if he left, his mother might disappear just as their father had years ago. But it was Oliver's reaction that broke everyone's hearts. His carefully constructed routines shattered by the hospital environment, he retreated further into himself. The progress he'd made in therapy began to reverse. He stopped using his communication cards, refused to make eye contact, and would only eat if the food was arranged in perfect geometric patterns. Michael watched helplessly as his sons grappled with their fear. He tried to help, bringing their favorite foods, offering to read stories, attempting to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the boys' ingrained distrust of adults leaving them made his efforts feel hollow. They accepted his presence with wary politeness, but their real trust remained with each other. The nights were the hardest. The boys refused to be separated, sleeping in a tangled heap on the small hospital room sofa. Their dreams were plagued with fears they couldn't articulate during waking hours. Lucas would wake up calling for his mother, Noah would cry silently into his pillow, Liam would check compulsively to make sure everyone was still there, and Oliver would rock himself back to sleep, humming the lullaby Sarah always sang to him. The hospital staff bent rules to accommodate them, moved by their dedication. The night nurse brought extra blankets and snacks. The janitor saved some clean sheets to make their sofa bed more comfortable, and even the stern head of pediatrics turned a blind eye to 4 children essentially living in an adult ward. One particularly difficult night, Oliver had a massive meltdown. The change in routine, the strange environment, and the underlying fear finally became too much. As he screamed and thrashed, the other patients began to complain. Michael moved to intervene, but before he could, his other sons sprang into action with practiced precision. Lucas created a barrier between Oliver and the curious onlookers. Noah quickly drew a picture of their home, showing it to Oliver as a reminder of where they would all return. Liam began singing their mother's lullaby, slightly off-key, but with perfect timing. Their coordinated response, born from years of understanding their brother's needs, gradually helped Oliver calm down. The incident made Michael realize just how much he had missed, how much these boys had learned to depend on each other in his absence. They weren't just brothers, they were a self-contained unit, each playing a vital role in their shared survival. Sarah, even in her weakened state, tried to maintain their normal routines. She would quiz Lucas on his spelling words between tests, admire Noah's drawings before falling asleep, hold Liam's hand during scary procedures, and whisper Oliver's favorite stories even when speaking caused her pain. Her determination to be their mother, even from a hospital bed, was both inspiring and heartbreaking. As Sarah's condition worsened, the boys' facade of coping began to crack. They could sense the adults' worried whispers, see the concern in the doctors' faces, feel the growing tension in the room. Their carefully constructed world, held together by their mother's love and their own resilience, was threatening to unravel. One evening, Lucas crawled into bed beside Sarah, careful of the tubes and wires. "Please don't leave us, Mama," he whispered, his voice small and scared. "We don't know how to be us without you." His brothers gathered close, each adding their own silent plea to his words. In that moment, they weren't the strong, capable children who had survived abandonment and poverty. They were just four terrified little boys facing their greatest fear, losing the one person who had never given up on them. The family's emotional reconciliation attempts unfolded against the backdrop of Sarah's deteriorating health. Michael moved into a hotel near the hospital, attempting to create some stability for the boys while respecting their established routines. Each morning, he would arrive with fresh clothes and their favorite breakfast foods, trying to learn the intricate dance of caring for four unique children. His efforts were met with mixed responses. Lucas maintained a polite but distant demeanor, accepting help while keeping an emotional wall firmly in place. Noah would share his drawings but wouldn't explain their meanings to Michael, as he did with Sarah. Liam allowed physical comfort but wouldn't speak about his fears. Oliver surprisingly seemed the most accepting of Michael's presence, perhaps because he hadn't yet learned to harbor the same distrust as his brothers. Martha became the bridge between past and present, helping Michael understand the complex ecosystem of his sons' lives. She explained Oliver's need for specific colored cups at mealtimes, Lucas's responsibility for checking homework, Noah's artistic communication style, and Liam's fear of thunderstorms. Each detail was a reminder of the years Michael had missed, the bonds he hadn't helped forge. Sarah watched their halting attempts at connection from a hospital bed, offering guidance when she could. "Lucas needs to feel in control," she would whisper during her stronger moments. "Let Noah draw his feelings. Don't force Liam to talk. Just sit with Oliver. Sometimes he'll come to you when he's ready." Each instruction was a masterclass in understanding children she had raised alone. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during one of Sarah's worst days. The boys were particularly anxious, sensing their mother's distress. Oliver began showing signs of an impending meltdown, overwhelmed by the medical equipment's beeping and the fluorescent lights. Before his brothers could implement their usual calming routine, Michael stepped in. Following the patterns he'd observed over the past weeks, he dimmed the lights, turned Oliver away from the machines, and began humming the lullaby he'd heard Sarah use countless times. To everyone's surprise, Oliver leaned into him, accepting comfort from his father for the first time. The other boys watched this interaction with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. Lucas's protective stance softened slightly. Noah began sketching the scene, adding color for the first time since Sarah's hospitalization. Liam inched closer to Michael, drawn by his brother's acceptance. That evening, as Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, Michael attempted to maintain their bedtime routine. He stumbled through their favorite stories, tried to remember which brother needed which stuffed animal, and did his best to recreate the sense of security Sarah had always provided. "You're doing it wrong," Lucas finally said, but his voice held more amusement than criticism. He proceeded to show Michael the correct way to read Goodnight Moon, complete with specific voices for each character. It was the first time he had voluntarily helped his father learn their routines. Noah contributed by drawing a detailed schedule of their usual evening activities. Liam demonstrated the proper technique for checking under beds for monsters. Oliver, in his own way, approved of Michael's efforts by falling asleep against his shoulder, a profound display of trust from a child who struggled with physical contact. Sarah witnessed this tentative bonding from her hospital bed, her heart both lifting and breaking. These were the moments she had dreamed of years ago, her children with their father, learning to be a family. But the circumstances were all wrong, tainted by the specter of her illness and the weight of past abandonment. The family's attempts at reconciliation were further complicated by the constant stream of medical updates, each one serving as a reminder of their precarious situation. The boys would take 2 steps forward in accepting Michael, then retreat 3 steps back when a doctor's grave expression reminded them why he was there. Still, small moments of progress continued. Lucas began including Michael in his daily reports about his brother's activities. Noah started drawing pictures for him as well as Sarah. Liam would occasionally seek comfort from his father during particularly difficult moments. Oliver's acceptance seemed to pave the way for his brother's gradual thawing. Yet underlying all these tentative steps toward family unity was the terrible knowledge that they were running out of time. Sarah's condition continued to worsen despite treatment, and the boys' growing acceptance of Michael seemed painfully linked to their subconscious preparation for a future without their mother. As Michael watched his sons sleep in their usual pile on the hospital room sofa, he realized that true reconciliation would require more than just learning their routines or earning their routines or earning their trust. He would need to prove that he could be the father they deserved, not just in crisis, but in all the ordinary moments that made up a family's life. The question was whether they would have time to build that foundation before their world changed forever. The discovery came through Martha's relentless investigation into Sarah's medical history. After weeks of making calls and following paper trails, she found a critical error in Sarah's original diagnosis. The hospital's pathology lab had mixed up her test results with another patient's, leading to an incorrect treatment plan that had worsened her condition rather than improving it. Stop everything, Martha burst into the hospital room, waving documents in her hand. The boys startled awake on their makeshift bed, and Michael jumped up from his chair beside Sarah. "The treatment, it's all wrong. They've been making her worse." The ensuing hours were a whirlwind of activity. New tests were ordered, specialists were consulted, and Sarah's entire medical team was replaced. The corrected diagnosis revealed a treatable condition that had been exacerbated by months of inappropriate medication. "With the right treatment protocol, there's every reason to expect a full recovery," the new specialist explained, his words bringing the first real hope they'd had in weeks. The boys, who had become experts at reading adults' expressions, saw the truth in his face and began to cry, not from fear this time, but from relief. Oliver, who had been nearly non-verbal since Sarah's hospitalization, suddenly pointed to his mother and said clearly, "Mama, come home." The doctor smiled and nodded, causing all 4 boys to break into a group hug that included Michael without anyone quite meaning to. Sarah's improvement, once the correct treatment began, was remarkable. Color returned to her cheeks, her strength gradually increased, and most importantly, her smile, the one her sons had feared they might never see again, came back. The revelation wasn't just medical, it sparked a deeper understanding within the family. They had faced their greatest fear together, each finding strength they didn't know they possessed. Lucas learned he could share the burden of responsibility. Noah found his voice again through his art. Liam's anxiety began to ease as he saw his mother improve. Oliver started using more words, encouraged by the positive changes around him. Michael, who had been prepared to move heaven and earth to save Sarah, realized that sometimes the biggest miracles come from simply paying attention to the details others miss. The experience had shown him that being a father wasn't about grand gestures or financial provisions. It was about being present, being patient, and being willing to learn from his children. As Sarah grew stronger, the family dynamics shifted. The boys began to include Michael in their daily routines, not out of necessity, but out of choice. They found that their unit of 5 had room to grow to 6, not replacing their bonds but expanding them. Martha, who had never stopped fighting for this family, sat in the corner of the hospital room, watching as 4 excited boys showed their parents the welcome home banner they had made together. Her persistence in questioning the original diagnosis had given these children back their mother, given Sarah back her life, and given Michael a second chance at being the father he should have been all along. The truth was clear. Sometimes the greatest reversals of fortune come not from dramatic interventions or expensive treatments, but from the simple act of refusing to accept what seems inevitable. In questioning the diagnosis, Martha had done more than save Sarah's life. She had preserved the heart of a family that had already endured more than its fair share of hardship. Michael's sacrifice came in layers, each one revealing a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a father. His first action was immediate and practical. He sold his controlling shares in Richardson Global Enterprises to fund Sarah's treatment and establish a trust for the boys' future care. The business world was shocked. Elizabeth Richardson was horrified. Stella was livid. "You're throwing away your father's legacy," Elizabeth accused during a heated confrontation in the hospital hallway. "Everything we built, everything we protected, you're just giving it up for my family," Michael finished quietly. The real legacy Dad would have wanted. He thought of his father, who had started with a single hardware store and built an empire, but who had always made time to have dinner with his family. Somewhere along the way, after his father's death, that simple truth had been lost. The sale of his shares meant more than just money. It meant walking away from the world that had defined him, the power that had shaped his choices, the identity he had hid behind. He stepped down as CEO, declined his board position, and essentially made himself unemployed for the first time in his life. But the real sacrifice wasn't financial. It was in the small, daily acts of humility as he learned to be a father. He sat through Oliver's therapy sessions, learning the techniques Sarah had mastered years ago. He studied Lucas's color-coded homework system, memorized Noah's art supply preferences, and learned how to check for monsters under beds exactly the way Liam needed. The transformation wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration, times when his old life called to him with its simple clarity of profit and loss. But then Oliver would reach for his hand during a meltdown, or Lucas would ask for help with his reading, or Noah would share a drawing, or Liam would fall asleep on his shoulder, and the choice became clear again. Sarah watched his metamorphosis from her hospital bed, offering guidance when needed but allowing him to find his own way with their sons. She saw how he learned to anticipate Oliver's sensory overloads, to recognize Lucas's need for control, to appreciate Noah's silent communications, to soothe Liam's anxieties. The biggest test came when Stella made one final attempt to reclaim her position. She arrived at the hospital with contracts, lawyers, and promises of restoring Michael's position if he would just be reasonable about the custody arrangement. Michael's response was immediate and final. He tore up the contracts without reading them, turned to where his sons were watching wide-eyed, and said clearly, "No one will ever separate this family again." It was the moment the boys began to truly believe in their father's commitment. His sacrifice rippled out in unexpected ways. Other wealthy parents at Oliver's therapy center took note of his presence at sessions, his hands-on involvement setting a new standard. The business world, initially scandalized by his choices, began discussing the importance of family-first corporate policies. But the most profound change was in Michael himself. The man who had once measured success in stock prices and market shares now found joy in successfully navigating Oliver through a crowded store, helping Lucas master a difficult spelling word, praising Noah's latest artwork, or convincing Liam to try something new. The sacrifice of his old life brought an unexpected gift, the chance to be part of the beautiful, complicated, challenging and deeply loving family Sarah had built. He discovered that true wealth wasn't in his bank account or company portfolio, but in the trust slowly growing in his children's eyes, in the strength of Sarah's recovery, in the daily victories and struggles they faced together. As Sarah grew stronger and the family settled into new routines, Michael realized that what had seemed like sacrifice was actually liberation. He had given up the Richardson empire, but he had gained something far more valuable, the chance to be the father his children deserved and the man he had always wanted to be. Family unity crystallized in unexpected moments during Sarah's recovery. The hospital room became a classroom of love, where past hurts began to heal through small, daily interactions. The boys, who had been their own tight unit for so long, gradually expanded their circle to include Michael, not as a replacement for their established bonds, but as an addition to their complex family dynamic. The most profound example came during one of Sarah's therapy sessions. Oliver, who had been watching his mother struggle with physical exercises, suddenly took Michael's hand and placed it next to his own on Sarah's shoulder, a gesture of shared support that brought tears to everyone's eyes. His brothers, following his lead, joined in, creating a chain of small hands linking mother and father. The crisis had forced them all to adapt, to find new strengths and let go of old fears. Lucas discovered he could share the weight of responsibility without losing his role as protector. Noah began incorporating Michael into his drawings, first as a shadow in the background, then gradually as a full figure standing with the family. Liam's nightmares decreased as he realized that sometimes people who leave can come back and stay. Sarah watched this transformation from her hospital bed, her heart both aching and healing as she witnessed Michael learning the intricate dance of parenting their unique children. He made mistakes, using the wrong color cup for Oliver's juice, forgetting Lucas's homework routine, mixing up Noah's art supplies, but his willingness to learn from these errors spoke louder than any perfect performance could have. Martha, who had been their constant support, saw the family healing in quiet moments, Michael reading bedtime stories with different voices for each character, just as Sarah always had the boys teaching him their secret language of gestures and inside jokes. Sarah offering gentle guidance without taking over. The hospital staff noticed the change too. The night nurse commented on how the boys now slept more peacefully, still in their pile on the sofa, but with space created for Michael to sit nearby. The pediatric therapist remarked on Oliver's increased communication, noting how he now had two parents to practice his words with. One particularly meaningful moment came when Lucas fell asleep during his nightly vigil by Sarah's bed. Instead of waking him to move to the sofa with his brothers, Michael simply covered him with a blanket and took over his watch. When Lucas woke briefly, he didn't panic at finding Michael in his spot. He simply nodded and went back to sleep, a small but significant display of trust. The family's unity was tested when Stella made one final appearance, armed with legal documents and threats. But before Michael could respond, it was the boys who formed a protective circle around their parents' bed, their small faces set with determination. Even Oliver, usually overwhelmed by confrontation, stood firmly with his brothers. Stella, faced with this display of family solidarity, finally understood what she had never truly had: the unshakable bonds of real love. Sarah's recovery brought new challenges as they learned to function as a complete family unit. The boys had to adjust to having two parents making decisions, to new routines that included Michael's input, to sharing their mother's attention. But they also discovered the joy of having a father who was determined to make up for lost time, who approached each day as a chance to know them better. The transformation wasn't just in their daily lives, it was in their hearts. The walls built by abandonment and hardship began to crumble, replaced by bridges of understanding and forgiveness. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were growing, healing, becoming stronger together. One evening, as the family gathered in Sarah's hospital room, Oliver suddenly pointed to all of them and said clearly, family, it was more than a word, it was a declaration of belonging, of acceptance, of love that had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. The simple truth of that moment brought them all together in a group hug, no longer separated by past hurts or future fears, but united in the present moment of perfect understanding. The family they were becoming wasn't defined by blood alone, or by legal documents, or by societal expectations. It was built on choice, on forgiveness, on daily acts of love and courage. It was imperfect, complicated, and beautiful, just as real family should be. Sarah's recovery defied all medical expectations. Within 3 months, she was strong enough to return home, though home had transformed during her hospital stay. Michael had purchased a house in their old neighborhood, not a mansion like his former residence, but a warm, welcoming space with a backyard for the boys to play and enough room for everyone to have their own space while staying close. The homecoming was a celebration of life and new beginnings. The boys had decorated every inch of the house with welcome signs, Noah's artwork, and strings of fairy lights. Oliver's therapy room was set up exactly as it had been in their old apartment, maintaining his crucial routines while adding new elements he could explore when ready. Lucas's organizational systems were respected and incorporated into the new space, while Liam's need for security was addressed with nightlights and carefully arranged furniture. Martha, who had become much more than a former housekeeper, was there to witness the family's first steps into their new life. She watched as Sarah walked through the front door, supported by Michael on one side and Lucas on the other, with Noah, Liam, and Oliver following close behind. The scene was far removed from the elegant Richardson gathering she had once overseen, but infinitely more precious. The first evening in their new home set the tone for their future. Michael cooked dinner simple pasta that he had learned was Oliver's favorite, while Sarah supervised from a comfortable chair in the kitchen. The boys moved around them in their familiar choreography, setting the table, helping where needed, each contributing in their own way. During dinner, Lucas made an announcement that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. I think he said carefully, looking at Michael, "We could call you Dad now." If you want, his brothers nodded in agreement, even Oliver, who had already begun using the word in his own time. Michael's response was to excuse himself from the table, overwhelmed by emotion. When he returned, his eyes red but smile bright, he found his family waiting patiently, understanding his need to process the moment. This too was new, the freedom to show vulnerability, to be imperfect, to learn and grow together. The evening ended with their traditional bedtime routine, but with a significant change. While Sarah rested in the comfortable armchair they'd placed in the boys' room, Michael read the bedtime story, complete with all the correct voices she had taught him. The boys corrected him when he made mistakes, their giggles no longer tinged with the fear of loss or abandonment. As the children drifted off to sleep, Sarah and Michael stood in the doorway, watching their sons' peaceful faces. Lucas had one arm protectively draped over Noah, who clutched his sketchbook even in sleep. Liam had his comfort blanket wrapped around himself, and Oliver, who for once had fallen asleep without needing his usual extensive calming routine. "We made it," Sarah whispered, leaning against Michael's shoulder. The simple statement encompassed so much: her recovery, their reconciliation, the boys' acceptance, their new beginning as a complete family. "No," Michael corrected gently, "you made it. You built this beautiful family from nothing but love and determination. I'm just grateful you've given me the chance to be part of it." Sarah took his hand, remembering the long journey from that devastating wedding day to this moment. "We're all building it now," she said, "together." As if to emphasize her words, Oliver stirred in his sleep and mumbled, "Family," the word that had become his most frequent expression of contentment. His brothers shifted unconsciously to maintain their protective circle around him. even in sleep maintaining the bonds that had sustained them through every challenge. Martha, preparing to leave for the evening, paused to take in the scene one last time. The sight of Sarah and Michael standing together, watching over their sleeping children, was the culmination of years of hope, pain, forgiveness, and love. It wasn't the fairy tale ending Elizabeth Richardson had once envisioned for her son, but it was something far more valuable: a real family, built on understanding, acceptance, and unconditional love. The Richardson legacy, it turned out, had nothing to do with wealth or social status. The true legacy was in the love that had survived abandonment, illness, and prejudice, emerging stronger with each challenge overcome. Michael's redemption manifested in countless small moments that accumulated into profound change. Gone was the corporate titan who measured success in profit margins. In his place stood a father who celebrated Oliver's first complete sentence in therapy, who beamed with pride at Lucas's spelling bee victory, who displayed Noah's artwork in his home office, and who spent hours helping Liam overcome his fears. The transformation was most evident in his daily routines. Each morning began with helping the boys prepare for school, learning each child's unique preferences and needs. He mastered the art of making Oliver's breakfast: exactly right toast cut in precise triangles, fruit arranged in perfect patterns. He learned to check Lucas's backpack twice, knowing his oldest son's anxiety about forgetting assignments. He kept extra art supplies for Noah's spontaneous creative moments and always had Liam's comfort items within reach. His relationship with Sarah evolved into a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They developed a rhythm in parenting, each bringing their strengths to complement the other. Where Sarah had years of experience understanding their son's needs, Michael brought fresh energy and resources to support their dreams. Together, they created a home where both structure and spontaneity could thrive. The corporate world was baffled by his choices. Former colleagues couldn't understand why he'd traded board meetings for therapy sessions, business dinners for family meals. But Michael found more satisfaction in helping Oliver overcome a sensory challenge than he ever had in closing a multi-million-dollar deal. One defining moment came during a school parent-teacher conference. The teacher praised Lucas's leadership qualities, noting how he helped younger students. "He gets that from his mother," Michael said automatically, then added with pride, "but I'm learning from both of them." It was a simple statement that showed how far he'd come from the man who once let others define his worth. The most significant change was in his understanding of strength. He had once equated it with power, control, and financial success. Now he saw it in Sarah's patient guidance, in Lucas's protective instincts, in Noah's quiet persistence, in Liam's growing confidence, and in Oliver's daily victories over his challenges. His mother, Elizabeth, made one final attempt to draw him back to the Richardson fold. She arrived unannounced one Sunday during their traditional family breakfast. The scene she encountered Michael, in an apron, helping Oliver arrange his food while discussing Lucas's soccer game, as Sarah and the other boys set the table, left her momentarily speechless. "You could have had everything," she said finally. "Instead, you choose this." Michael looked around at his family, at Sarah's knowing smile, at Lucas's protective stance, at Noah's curious observation, at Liam's nervous fidgeting, at Oliver's methodical breakfast arrangement. "No, Mother," he replied quietly. "I finally chose everything that matters." The true measure of his redemption came not in grand gestures but in earned trust, in Oliver seeking him out during overwhelming moments, in Lucas asking for advice, in Noah sharing his private sketchbook, in Liam falling asleep in his arms. Each small sign of acceptance was worth more than all his former wealth. He found new purpose in advocating for families like his own. The trust fund he established wasn't just for his sons but extended to support other families with special needs children. He used his business experience to create programs helping single parents return to work, remembering Sarah's struggles. The man who had once abandoned his pregnant fiancée became a father who never missed a school event, who learned every therapy technique, who celebrated every milestone, no matter how small. His redemption wasn't in making up for the past, but in building a future worthy of the family he almost lost. Through it all, Sarah watched his transformation with growing trust and love. She saw how he worked to earn their children's confidence, how he learned from his mistakes instead of hiding from them, how he chose their family over everything else. His redemption was complete not when he achieved perfection, but when he embraced the beautiful imperfection of real family life. The wedding renewal took place in their backyard on a perfect spring morning, exactly 6 years after the original wedding that never happened. This time, there were no society photographers, no elaborate decorations, no extensive guest list. Instead, there were fairy lights strung across the garden, handmade decorations created by the boys, and only their closest friends in attendance. Lucas, now their official ring-bearer, took his role seriously, practicing his walk for weeks. Noah had designed the programs filled with his illustrations of their family's journey. Liam overcame his anxiety about crowds to read a poem he'd written himself. Oliver, in his own special way, contributed by arranging flowers in perfect symmetrical patterns along the aisle. Martha served as both officiant and witness, her voice steady as she spoke about love's power to heal and transform. She stood before them in the same spot where she had once watched their family begin to rebuild, now celebrating how far they had come. Sarah wore a simple white dress, nothing like her original wedding gown, but her smile was infinitely more radiant. Michael stood beside her, not in an expensive suit, but in clothes chosen by their sons, his pride evident in every gesture. The vows they exchanged were different too. They spoke not just to each other but to their children, acknowledging that their love story had grown to encompass so much more than just two people. They promised to continue building their family together, to face whatever challenges came their way as a united front, to always remember that love was shown through actions more than words. The moment that moved everyone to tears came when Oliver, who still struggled with speech, suddenly stepped forward during the ceremony. "Family forever," he announced clearly, signing the words as he spoke them, a skill he'd recently learned. His brothers immediately joined him, creating a circle around their parents as they repeated the words and signs. The reception was a joyful chaos of children laughing, friends celebrating, and love overflowing. There was no formal dinner, just favorite foods from local restaurants. No orchestral music, just a playlist created by the boys, featuring songs from their bedtime routines. No elaborate cake, but cupcakes decorated by 4 pairs of small hands. As evening fell, the fairy lights twinkled like stars, and the new Mr. and Mrs. Richardson danced in their backyard, surrounded by their sons. The boys joined them, creating their own unique dance moves, their laughter mixing with the music in a perfect symphony of happiness. Martha watched from her seat, remembering the broken family she had once helped deceive, marveling at the healing power of truth and love. Elizabeth Richardson, who had received but declined an invitation, would never understand what she had missed: the true meaning of family, legacy, and love. The night ended with all 6 of them piled onto the porch swing, watching the last guests leave. Oliver was already asleep in Michael's arms, Noah was sketching the fairy lights, Liam was curled up against Sarah, and Lucas was making plans for tomorrow. "We did it," Sarah whispered to Michael, echoing her words from the hospital, but now filled with joy rather than relief. "No," he replied, looking at their sons with infinite love, "they did it. They taught us what family really means." As the stars appeared above their home, this family that had been forged in adversity, strengthened by challenges, and completed by love, sat together in peaceful contentment. Their story wasn't perfect, it was better than perfect. It was real, with all the messiness, complexity, and beauty that true love brings. The Richardson legacy had been redefined not by wealth or status, but by the unwavering love of a mother, the redemption of a father, and the unbreakable bonds between 4 remarkable brothers who had shown them all what really matters in life. If this story of love, redemption, and family touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Sarah's situation? How do you feel about Michael's transformation? Your insights and experiences make our community stronger. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that celebrate the triumph of love over adversity. Share this video with friends and family who might need a reminder that second chances are possible. Hit the like button if you believe in the power of forgiveness and the strength of a mother's love. Together, let's spread hope and inspire others.